Okay, we're up to discussing Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, known as the Rif. The Rif was a student of Rabbeinu Hananel and Rabbeinu Nisim Gaon, and he lived most of his life in the city of Fez. As you can see here on the map, Fez is in northern Africa, right south of Spain. And we mentioned that this in general region is the central region for the early Sephardic Rishonim. And the reason why the Rif is known as Alfasi is because that means from Fez, and that was the city which is in present-day Morocco. The Rif's major work is the halachos, called the halachos or the halachos rabasi. And in the halachos, the Rif weaves together select statements from the Gemara with a focus on the psak, focus on the final conclusions, the maskana of each sugya. He omits a lot of the back and forth, a lot of the discussion in the Gemara, and tries to highlight what is the final psak. This is the focus in general of the early Sephardic Rishonim, la'asuke shmaita aliba de hilchasa, to learn the sugya with a focus on arriving at the psak. You see on the right side of the screen right now, so the way that we have the Rif printed in the back of our Gemara today, right, the Rif appears in the back of most Gemaras, so it's structured like the page of the Gemara. You see in the middle, what for a regular Gemara page would be the Gemara, so in the Rif, it's the Rif's halachos in the middle of the page. And this is the first page of brachos. Anyone who's learned the beginning of brachos knows that the Gemara doesn't begin with Tanur Rabbanan, Me'emasai Maschil, and Likros, Kriya Shema. But the Rif leaves out the initial discussion of the Gemara, which is more technical in nature and isn't focused on halacha l'maisa. And the Rif begins with this statement, with this Tanur Rabbanan, because that is what he feels is the important beginning of brachos in terms of halacha l'maisa. Indeed, the Rif only wrote his work, the halachos, on areas of Shas that had practical halachic ramifications. So, for instance, the starim of Moed, Nashim, and Ezekin. On those starim, he wrote halachos. In other starim, Kodshim, Taros, he didn't write, except for the Masechtas that had relevance to daily life. So, for instance, Maseches Brachos, as you see on the screen, or Chulin, which discusses the halachos of Shchita, or Nida. So in those Masechtas, the Rif included a Perush, or a commentary called the Halachos, because of its relevance to daily life. But even in Masechtas, such as Psachim, which has relevance to daily life, the Rif only wrote on the Prakim that were relevant. So for instance, the first parak which discusses Bedikas Chametz and Bir Chametz, and the last parak which discusses the Seder, the Rif wrote on. But the middle parts of the Masechta, which deal with Karban Pesach, so the Rif did not write halachos on that section because they weren't relevant to practical life. So if we had to summarize what is the Rif's commentary, it is an elucidated abridgment of the Gemara and includes with a focus on psak. The Rif was influenced here by his Rebbeim, Rabbeinu Hananel and Rav Nisim Gaon, that their shitas and their analysis are reflected in his psak. He quotes from the Gaonim, such as Rav Hai Gaon. He includes his own chidushim, which he writes in Aramaic, not in Hebrew. He writes it in Aramaic, and he weaves it into the discussion when he has what of himself to say. So he'll add that into the discussion. The Rif was a very, very influential Rishon, and his work, the Halachos, was very, very popular. And in many places, it actually replaced the Gemara itself. Many people felt, what do we need to learn the Gemara for? The Rif cut out all of the back and forth, and he gave us the important sections. And for this reason, the Rif in certain areas was nicknamed the Talmud Katan. And there were many Rishonim that wrote commentaries on the Rif, even though you might not be aware of that. So for instance, perhaps the greatest example is the parish of the Rush, the Piskei Rush. The Piskei Rush, what we refer to as the Rush in the back of the Gemara, is actually written on the Rif. And if you look in the most recent printings of the Oz V'Hadar Gemaras, so they actually bolded the sections of the Rush that are verbatim quotes from the Rif. And if you take a look, you'll be surprised, I would imagine, of how much of the Rush's commentary is really just cut and pasted from the Rif. And the Rush is a commentary that uses the Rif as the structure for his commentary. You see on the page here that we have Rashi on the Rif. Now the Rashi did not write a commentary on the Rif, but this reflects the popularity of learning the Rif. And what the printers did was that anytime the Rif quoted a line from the Gemara that had Rashi on it, they included that Rashi on the page of the Rif. And this would help people learn the Rif, because this became the curriculum for many people. They studied the Rif, and Rashi was there to elucidate, because again, the Rif only cut and pasted statements from the Gemara. He didn't, like the Rambam after him, he didn't rewrite the Gemara in Hebrew. He took the original language of the Gemara, and therefore, if the original lashon of the Gemara, if the original language of the Gemara needed explanation, and Rashi served to provide that explanation, so Rashi was necessary for one who studied the Rif. The Rashi, though, that we have on the Rif, you should be aware, is not the same always as the Rashi that we have on the Gemara. It seems to be an earlier version of Rashi, and every once in a while there are important discrepancies that you'll note if you compare Rashi on the Gemara to Rashi on the Rif. Many people study the Rif, as we mentioned, and it's even reported that the Vilna Gaon used to encourage his students to learn the Rif every day and to review it well. We have to realize that the Rif, unlike the Rambam and others who wanted to paskin based on the Gemara and wrote, like for instance, if we talk about the Rambam took all of the relevant discussions from the Gemara and all the different places if he was discussing a particular area of halacha, and then he collected all of it and put it into a section called Hilchos X or Hilchos Y. But the Rif kept the structure of the Gemara, and this way people felt that they were still studying the Masechta. However, they were studying it with a focus on Psak Halacha. And this was one of the reasons why the Rif's Perish was so popular. Now, just to conclude our discussion here of the Rif, so the Rif spent the last 15 years of his life in Spain. He fled probably from North Africa, and this is because that life for Jews in North Africa became more and more challenging because of harsh decrees against the Jews there. And there was a northward movement into southern Spain. As you see on the screen now, we have the southern region of Spain, which is referred to as Andalusia. And we're going to talk more about that when we speak about the Rambam. But right in the center of Andalusia, you see Lucena, which was a major Jewish city. This is where the Rif moved to for the last 15 years of his life. And he led a yeshiva there. And the Beis Medrash of Lucena, the yeshiva of Lucena, as we will see as we speak about the Rimagash and others, became a major Torah center. And the Rif served as the Rosh Yeshiva there for 15 years. As we conclude now the commentaries from North Africa, so what we see is that the commentaries that emerged, whether it was Rabbeinu Nissim Gaon, Rabbeinu Hananel, the Rif, they were either paraphrases or abridgments of the Gemara's discussion. You could, in a certain sense, learn through them without the Gemara. You didn't need the Gemara in order to understand the Rabbeinu Hananel, because he was summarizing the discussion. And the same thing was true certainly with the Rif, that the Rif became the Talmud Katan because it was the Rif's version, so to speak, of the Gemara discussion.